Okay, so it's a little bit after 10 a.m. I guess I'll get started. Let me move to the pretend podium. All right. Just setting up my camera angle. One minute. So, sorry, I'm still fighting off some congestion, so I might cough a little here and there. I'm glad everybody can hear me. Thank you all very much for coming, and like I said, thanks to SC and Jess and Chantal and all for having me and for setting up and spending the time helping me set up. I guess I should start with the I have these three signs in front. Let me start with the introduction one on the left as you're facing it. If there's, yeah. So basically, I thought I'd start with just a brief introduction to myself and what I'm doing here, what I've done in Second Life and as a website and why. So basically, I've got a background in chemistry, microbiology, and some other areas, and I've done graduate research in microbiology where I became really interested in, well, bacteria, sort of, but especially bacteria that can survive in really crazy conditions. And then I got interested in the search for microbial or sort of bacterial life beyond Earth, including on what I think is the most promising possibility in that regard, which is moons in the solar system, not the moon, but other moons. So, I just decided, as partly my own library and to share information and my interest with others, and to sort of collect information in maybe a unique way, that I would put together a website and a sort of similar or parallel exhibit in Second Life. So that's what I did. So there's an exhibit in Second Life that reflects my website. There's a landmark all the way to the right, and then there's a website itself, and the website is FosdixAstrobiology.com. The URL is on the sign to the right. With that, I would say I want to make very clear what I'm not. So I'm not a PhD scientist. I've got a master's degree, but I never did a PhD. I never worked for NASA or taught in any universities, although I have some teaching experience. But I do have the graduate experience and so forth, and I'm just interested. So I don't consider myself a super expert in any particular area. Mostly I just have this interest, some background, gathered information, and put it together. And the idea was to put together this information so that lay people with good science backgrounds, but not necessarily scientists, can have an understanding of this, what I think is just an intriguing area. So thanks for the very cool and for the applause. So I just think it's wild that we could very well be on the verge, on the precipice of discovering microbial life beyond Earth. It could very well happen, I think, in all of our lifetimes, maybe in the next 10 or 15 years. It's just a guess. But there's a lot of things that we don't know. I'm still on the introduction. We really don't know much because we only have one sample. We have life on Earth. Every cell on Earth is very similar, from bacteria to human beings' cells. So we really don't know what possible variation there might be. Maybe there's all sorts of different life in the universe. Maybe it's all very similar to life on Earth. Maybe there's no other life in the universe but life on Earth. We just don't know for sure. So, but if we find, and this goes to D, why 2 would be infinitely greater than 1. In my opinion, if we find life beyond Earth, and if it wasn't sort of transported from Earth in such a way that it's very similar, if it really is alien life, alien cells with alien cellular metabolisms, alien biochemistry, etc., it would be an infinite. We'd be infinitely further in understanding life in the universe than we are today, because now we have two we can compare. How are they similar? How are they different? What might lie in between? I feel it's like a line that you can now draw between 2 points. You have only 1 point, you don't have much. You have a line, you have a world of information. So I think it'll be fascinating when and if, as I think we will, as humanity being we, will find life on other planets, or more likely other moons in the solar system first, I think. Define life? Man, that's above my pay grade for sure. I mean, I think as far as the question, define life, I don't know that I can really do it. I'm not sure it's even really possible. My best insight on that is that if as most people think, if life evolved from simpler chemicals, then there may not be any real line to draw. It may be that life is just sort of this unique chemical evolution that at some point becomes so lifelike in terms of the parameters that we're used to that we call it life. I mean, you can assign a bunch of characteristics, motility. You can talk about eating, and you can talk about capacity to reproduce, preserve itself. But I can't clearly define. I feel like if there is a definition for life conceptually, I guess I don't want to spend too much time. Maybe I shouldn't spend too much time on it. But if there's a definition conceptually for life, I feel like it would have to have to it some kind of an element of a chemical system that strives, for lack of a better word, or behaves such that it preserves itself. To me, that seems fundamental, but self-replicating chemical system sounds good to me. It's a tough one, so I guess I'll leave that to greater minds than mine. But yeah, right. So going on. So I think that, and I'm happy to talk about all this stuff. I don't know how much I should take questions and how much I should get into the presentation. So I guess I'll just get through the presentation in maybe half an hour, and then happy to discuss all these things or talk, I guess. And even after the hour is up, happy to talk more or chat more, because these things are all really fascinating to me. I once sat around a fire in my backyard. I had a fire pit going, and I was talking with my friend about why this fire can't be life. It seems to sort of self-replicate. It seems to strive to continue itself by finding fuel. It seems to take in energy and give off waste. Why isn't it alive? And we didn't get very far, but I thought it was an interesting thing to talk about over a beer or two. So anyway, I look at it as a treasure hunt. It's the search for something that would be really great to find, and we can keep narrowing down the hunt, the treasure hunt, until we actually find life. And it's done in a lot of ways. We don't actually have to go outside the Earth necessarily. We can use radio telescope information and other telescope information. We can use information that we get from a distance about the constituent chemicals of atmospheres and other planets and so forth. I don't claim to be an expert on all that, but I know it's been done, and we've gotten a lot of information that way that can help us narrow down where to look and how to look for life. So still on the introduction, I think that, and this is pretty much common knowledge or a common belief, that since we only have one data point, we have life on Earth, how do we start looking for other life? We have to make some assumptions, some suppositions. So we suppose that our best chance of finding life outside Earth is to find life that's similar to life on Earth. We don't know how similar it might be, but we got to start somewhere. So liquid water and carbon, I think, are fundamental in narrowing down where we should look for life outside Earth. So a lot of people will talk also about availability of energy, an energy source, and I think that's true, but I think it's pretty common. There are energy sources in various forms, in various locations in the solar system and outside the solar system. I feel like finding liquid water is rare, and it seems to be potentially fundamental to all life, at least to life on Earth for sure. We're all basically mostly water. Every cell in our body is mainly water. So I think liquid water is key. So, and with liquid water, you get into a little bit of the physics. Where can you find liquid water in the solar system beyond the Earth? Well, you're only going to find it where there's sufficient pressure and sufficient heat. Like every other compound, water is only liquid in a range of pressures and temperatures. And in general, throughout the solar system, it's believed the universe, it's mostly cold and low pressure. So on the Earth, well, I guess I won't go that far right now. But basically, you need to look for places where there might be pressure and heat sufficient to maintain liquid water. It so happens that moons in the solar system meet that criteria. It's believed that, for example, Europa, the moon of Jupiter, has a liquid water ocean underneath several miles of ice on its surface. The pressure comes from the ice because you don't have the same level of gravity and atmosphere as Earth to provide pressure. And then the heat, where does that come from? It's believed that something called tidal forces or tidal flexing provides the heat. And basically that's movement and friction caused by gravity and gravity differentials during the orbit of Europa and other moons around their home planet, in this case Jupiter. It basically pulls on the material of the moon and heats things up. So there, it's believed that there's, and for other reasons, it's believed that there's an ocean, a massive ocean of liquid water under the surface of Europa, the moon, which is wild. So then the other thing about life is, most people, if they've ever watched Star Trek, have heard of carbon-based life. So life is sort of water-based in that water is the solvent. It's the thing that all the chemicals dissolve in, and it makes the chemical processes of life possible. But carbon is the chemical backbone of life. It's a unique element in that it's light and it's abundant in the universe and in the solar system, but it can form an amazing variety of different compounds, even within itself, different sort of shapes, three-dimensional shapes, and it can merge with and bond with all sorts of other elements. So we sort of assume that we might find life where there's liquid water and where there's carbon. And in terms of carbon, life can't just use carbon. It has to sort of build it up into more complex organic compounds, which are basically carbon-containing compounds. So where you find evidence of carbon-containing compounds, of organic chemicals, you might find life. At least that's the supposition that people are making for now. Let's see. So I'm going on now to the introduction part G. Actually, I already talked about that. So what's in those oceans right now? To me, that's really intriguing. I call them oceans. It's a loose term, but they're massive bodies of water underneath the surfaces of moons. At least that's what's believed. So let's see. So that's basically my introduction. If there are questions, please ask. The next thing I think I'll do is just talk a little bit about the sign to the right before I get to the one in the middle. So the sign to the right, this is, if you looked at my website, Woods Astrobiology, the homepage, there's sort of a table of contents. It's like a library, or it's my own sort of library on this topic, mostly about the search for microbial life beyond Earth, but also touching on the search for intelligent life beyond Earth, mostly through radio SETI or radio telescope techniques. Let's see. So the way I've set the website up, there's about maybe 30 articles, and I thought I'd go through a number of those articles now, just to introduce you to it and give some basic information. And if there's questions or if there's a conversation about them, that's great. So let's see, question. There's a ton of talk about ice 12 as the bottom of these oceans. Could you explain what ice 12 is like? No, I can't. I don't know what ice 12 is. Maybe you could tell me. But so ice 12 at the bottom, I assume you mean of the subsurface oceans generally on moons in the solar system. So no, I don't know what that is. I'd have to look it up. I don't want to do that now, but it sounds interesting. I'd be happy to talk to you about it after the presentation or at another time. So I'm sorry, I don't always have all the really cutting edge information, but I do my best. So anyway, but I'm interested, that's for sure. Carbon 12 ice. Yeah, I'm really not sure. I'm not sure about that. I can't talk intelligently about it really. So, but I'm happy to later. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm just using a regular object to display these textures or these images, which are also found on my website. So I guess I'll go through them, and if you want to follow along on the website, if you go to the home page, you'll see these images also are reflected in the web pages that you can link to from the links in the website. Anyway, so what I've already talked about is really this first image that an area of astrobiology, what I'm particularly interested in is the search for microbial life beyond Earth, so microscopic life, generally bacteria or bacteria-like at least. Let's see. Who knows if it might be similar or dissimilar to life on Earth in many different ways. There could be other solvents besides water. There could be other chemical backbones besides carbon, but water and carbon seem like the most likely candidates. So that's that post. So the next thing I'm going to do is just look up my other slides and go through a few or some, and if there's particular questions or interest, I could focus more or not. So hang on while I just pull up these slides. I wish SL allowed me to sort my inventory a little bit better than it does, so I have to hunt around just a little bit. So let's see. I'm going to go to this slide. So if you look on the table of contents on the right, I'm now at the third line down, Life 101 for astrobiology. So I'm taking a look at the chat, and I'm glad to see it. It's a little too much for me to try to get through all that, especially since I'm not really familiar with the details. So I won't really talk on it, but it sounds interesting. So anyway, this article, I won't go through it in detail, but I start the sort of library with a talk about the basic characteristics of life as we know it, life on Earth, which we assume is similar to other life, until proven otherwise. So I go into it in here. I won't go into too much detail right now. Anybody with a biological background would know a lot of this basic stuff. But cellular life has some basic characteristics, and it can really help us try to find other cellular life, particularly the organic compounds. Organic compounds can be found in the solar system, and especially in abundance in some moons and other bodies in the solar system. And that could be a hint where there's organic compounds. It's at least a hint that might be a good place to look for life. There are different types of cells and all that, but I won't go into too much detail there. I'm going to go to the next image. So these images are merged in my website, but it was difficult to merge them with the images in SL, so I do them separate. So this is just an image to support and give a little color, as it were, to the basics of life on Earth. You can see the cell walls, the nuclei of the cells. This is basic microbiology, but I find it fascinating. So let's see. I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat. If anybody has a question, please feel free to make sure I see it. Shout it out in chat or something. So anyway, I'm going to move on. So now I'm moving on to item 6, which is basic organic chemistry. Or no, I'm not. I take it back. So after I've now talked about the basics of life, in my website, the next thing I do is talk about how life might have evolved. And that brings us to what I think is a fascinating experiment from several decades ago, the Yuri Miller experiment. Let's see. And so I want to talk about that for a minute. I realize that people have different views on whether life evolved at all. Some people think that life was created by God, without evolution. Most scientists believe that evolution occurred, whether God was involved or not. I do think that evolution occurred myself, so I make that assumption, but I respect all views. So the next slide I actually have is the development of early life on Earth. It's really important to look at early life on Earth because it gives you a sense of how life may have evolved, come to be from simpler chemicals on other bodies in the solar system. And so you can use that information to inform your hunt. You can say, okay, well, for example, oxygen in the atmosphere was created by early life on Earth. If we find other, well, maybe not in the solar system, but other bodies in other solar systems with a lot of oxygen in the atmosphere, maybe it was biologically generated, and we can focus the search on places like that. So let me read this and see if there's a question there. New life forms seem to develop in near-shore environments and to move progressively deeper environs. But this may be beyond the microbial search for life. Yuri Miller done at the University of Chicago. Interesting. So I don't know about that, but it does sound interesting. Those types of observations can help inform where to look for life. elsewhere in the universe, elsewhere in the solar system, and that in turn can help us find it much faster than if we sort of used a more grunt approach. I think that, what are they called? Well, there are cryovolcanoes. So we have thermal vents, I think they're called, undersea, essentially underwater volcanoes or vents, where you have chemicals and heat coming up, almost like a volcano underwater. There's been life found around those vents, even in the absence of sunlight, deep in the sea. So it's interesting. That might suggest that there could be life, for example, in subsurface oceans of other planets. It would be much colder water, but there could be hydrothermal vents, I think they're called, there too. And that could provide the chemical elements and some heat and mixing that could drive the evolution of life, even without sunlight, because you're not going to get much sunlight or any deep in the under subsurface oceans of other bodies in the solar system. So let me read this. During snowball era, Earth era, life survived in the deep ocean for millions of years. That's interesting. I remember reading a bit about that, but you probably know more about it than me. But that's a fascinating observation, because life deep undersea is similar, or at least you would think it might be similar to life in subsurface oceans, for the obvious reason that it's isolated from the sun, and it's let me think. It's mainly that it's isolated from the sun. There's also not the interface with the air. The liquid water and air interface provides a chemical exchange that you don't get deep underneath the sea, and you also don't get it in subsurface oceans. So I'm also gonna, before I get to the next question, let me put a more interesting looking sign up. Then I want to talk about the silicon-based life question. So I'll get to the image in a minute. I remember my first sort of exposure to the idea of silicon-based life was Captain Kirk, the original Captain Kirk, because I'm getting old, when he found those. They were called Horta. They were these big, crazy-looking creatures that burrowed underground and were based on silicon instead of carbon. So it's an interesting question. I have an article on it that I can maybe get to later. In fact, I think I should, because it seems to be a question people are interested in. So I'll get to it. If you want to take a look, let me get to it. But basically, my feeling is it's possible. Silicon, I think, from what I know about it, which is not the most of anybody, but I think that silicon is different from carbon in ways that could prevent it from being as viable as a backbone for life. But it's probably the next best thing to carbon, from what we can tell. It doesn't form the same variety of structures as carbon, I think, by far, but it does form a lot. And carbon also has other characteristics, chemical characteristics in terms of bonding energies, which are kind of not too strong, but not too weak, so they can be broken apart, but they hold together, etc. I think silicon-based life is a real possibility. I do think that carbon-based life is a lot more likely, or maybe more common, and so it does make sense to focus more on carbon-based life. I think so, if it does offer differences in how we conduct the search. But I think carbon-based life is fascinating and theoretically possible. So moving on. So I wanted to talk about this slide because I think it demonstrates a really interesting principle, which is that the action of microorganisms, microbes on Earth, has amazing large-scale macroscopic effects on the Earth and the atmosphere. That's fascinating to begin with, I think, but it's especially fascinating in the sense that we can tell a lot about the atmospheres and something about the large-scale content of solar system moons and other bodies by observations from a distance, from probes or telescopes. So, but even though these observations may be large-scale, they may tell us, or give us a good hint of whether there might be life. So, for example, on Earth, if another race, sent a space probe and was to view Earth from way above and saw this cyanobacteria bloom, it's a large-scale visible thing in the ocean caused by invisible bugs, invisible microorganisms. And these large-scale effects on atmospheres and planets' surfaces might very well be the case on other planets where life could be found and can help us find the life, going from the large to the small, as it were. Let's see. So, like a landmark towards Woods Astrobiology exhibit, the two large blue LMs on the side provide. So I don't know if I mentioned that, but I should. The exhibit that I created in in SL. It's in New Babbage. New Babbage is so well built. My exhibit is not. But New Babbage is incredibly detailed. It's a steampunk themed set of sims. I highly recommend checking it out just because it's so beautiful and so well built. But the blue LM to the right of the rightmost sign provides a landmark to my exhibit in New Babbage. It's sort of a warehouse, but it's got a bunch of these signs. So let's see, moving on. I hope I'm not taking too long, but what the heck, it seems interesting. So, yeah. The other thing about large-scale changes that life can produce is oxygen in the atmosphere. I think it's intriguing that almost all of the, 20% or so of the atmosphere that is oxygen, that oxygen was actually created, so to speak, by microbes on early Earth, almost for certain. Everything, all the oxygen we breathe and live on was created by, ancient bugs. I think is fascinating. Good shopping in Babbage? Yeah, there are some good shops there, I agree. What is one of them called? Well, whatever. Okay, so I'm going to move on through some more of these, unless anybody has questions in particular on any of them, in which case I'm happy to stop. But I guess I'll get through in maybe 45 minutes or 50 minutes and then take questions, something like that. And I'm happy to stay after if anybody wants to chat, or any other time for that matter. So let's see. What should I do next? So I guess the next thing would be the Yuri Miller apparatus. So I'd like to show you that one because I put a lot of work into it, for one thing. 1A, 2A. Hang on while I just bring up that sign. Again, I wish I could sort my inventory better, but if there's a way to do it, I've yet to figure it out. 1A, 2A. I think this is the one. Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. I'm really glad to hear it. I put the sign on the wrong, the texture on the wrong sign, so I'm gonna have to fix that. Please give me a minute. Darn it. Let's see. That was the outline. All right, fixed. I love it how you can fix things in Second Life so quickly. You can screw them up, I guess, just as quickly, especially if you don't remember to lock your buildings. That's bad. So let's see. Right. So anyway, the Yuri Miller experiment basically showed that all you've got to do is set up a really simple experimental system with basic stuff, water vapor, basic gases, and just keep hitting it with electrical charges. And you let it go for a while, basically, and you wind up with these complex amino acids, which, as every Biology 101 course will tell you, are the building blocks of life. It's pretty wild. It doesn't mean that life can evolve from this simple set of conditions, but it does mean that amino acids can, and it makes one think that maybe life can too. So that's the fundamentals about the Yuri Miller experiment. As I say, it's taken to powerfully suggest the possibility of life developing in increments over time, but naturally from non-living matter called abiogenesis, and without any plan. I mean, it just happens somehow. Chemically, it's very complex, but it happens. Let's see now. So I've got some private IMs going on, which I'm happy to read, but I don't want to take too much time to do it. It's a little tricky, but I'll do it later if I don't do it now. So let's see. So as far as the Yuri Miller experiment goes, I made a couple of slides on it. It might be a little much on this, but I really like these slides, so I'm going to show them real quick. So hang on, please. 1A, 2A, 2. Sorry about the slight delay. Just give me a minute, please. Man, it's hard to find things when you really need to find things. 1A2, A2, 9. So this one is actually not too complex, but it really demonstrates it. So with this experiment, this is all it really was fundamentally. Let's see, I just want to read this. Love the Julia Child video on primordial soup, the Yuri Miller experiment, right? The primordial soup. I can't have a hard time saying primordial, but I remember hearing that. The self-organization, life molecules is favored by entropy, provided there's an energy source. Yeah, I mean, that seems to be a really elegantly stated, perhaps, inference that can be made from this. So anyway, the experiment consisted of introducing water vapor and simple gases, which are common all over the place on Earth, and we think on early Earth, methane, ammonia, and then you just keep applying electrical sparks. You give it time and bang, out almost magically, at least some feel, pop these simple organic compounds, including amino acids. All right, so that's enough on Yuri Miller, or Miller Yuri. I don't know which way people say it anymore. So let me see, what time is it? 1:30. So then the next set of slides that I have talk about these key requirements for life, for known life, water, and then also carbon and other elements. I don't know if I should go through that all in detail, but I at least want to talk about water and carbon since I think that they're really, really critical, not just critical to life, but critical to finding life beyond Earth. So let's see. So I'm going to go to that next. So let me throw up the next sign, this time in the right place. Oh, this is also the Yuri Miller experiment, but I won't go into detail on that. It looks kind of cool, but I didn't actually draw this one. So I'm going to go on. So this is my slide without the images on liquid water. Maybe I'll just touch on it real quick. So what water is chemically is a solvent. Things dissolve, they break apart into ions in water, and that allows them to much more expediently form chemical bonds and other chemicals, other molecules, etc. I talk about why does life require a solvent? Really, it's for the chemical mixtures and the chemical interaction, and also for movement. Why liquid water as a solvent? There's a long answer to that, so I'll leave it to people who are interested enough to read about it. But basically, because it's a polar molecule, things dissolve in it well. That's a large part of it. So let's see. Here is a brilliant video. Why is life the way it is? By Michael Faraday. That sounds interesting. All right, so I'm going to move on. Oh, and this is just a display of the liquid water molecule, the polar molecule, which may be crucial for all life in the universe. Or maybe not. There are other possibilities as solvents for life. I think liquid hydrocarbons could potentially be a solvent for life. That, I think, is a fascinating possibility, but it's for another slide. So moving on, the next slide, let's see. Let me just see what the next slide is, and I'll go from there. I'll go in order since I can kind of get through them pretty quick, and it's easier to find them in order. I'll keep an eye out for the questions. Do you think methane has potential? Yes, I really do. I think, there's in one of my articles here, there's a link to a detailed scientific paper by an astrobiologist that specifically discusses the possibility of hydrocarbon and methane solvent-based life. I forget where on a moon in the solar system. It's fascinating. I think it may be possible. It's one of the best shots that we have because liquid hydrocarbons can be found on the surface of at least one moon in the solar system, where you have surface liquid, not just liquid, but surface liquid that interfaces with gases. You have a high potential relatively for life. Aren't hydrocarbons too non-polarized to replace water? I think that the answer to that is maybe. They're definitely, as I recall, not as polarized, and they might be more difficult for life to utilize. I think it's a fair point. We won't know, of course, unless we find life, but it seems to be chemically feasible. At least the brainiacs in that area think it might be. Anyway, so I don't say that water is the only solvent for life, just that it might be, and it's the solvent that we know of. And it seems to be the best from what we know for life based on Earth. And is it the only one with weather besides Earth? I think the answer to that, Charlize, is no. My reading about moons in the solar system is that there's phenomena that could be described as weather on other bodies throughout the solar system. Maybe the best, I don't know about the best example, but it's really liquid, surface liquid that is key, whether it's water or not. And I think if you look at the outline on the right, if you go down to the only light pink or light purple, there's probably a better word for the color, but there's one that says life on Titan with methane as a solvent. I discuss it in pretty good detail, my own opinion, and I think I cite to that research paper. So you might want to check that out. So anyway, but I'm going to go in order here and move on to the next sign unless I find Yeah, I'll leave that to the chemists, but I do think that non-carbon-based life is possible, but very hypothetical. Non-water solvent-based life, while also very hypothetical, seems a little more likely to me, so it's just all interesting. I'm going to move on to the next slide once I find the thing. So this is my favorite set of slides, partly because I spent a lot of time making them. So let's see. And I think, by the way, if you read that article of mine with possible life on Titan, a lot of different hydrocarbons or mixed hydrocarbons could potentially support life. There's even some evidence that on Titan, there's chemicals that suggest life has already changed the makeup of the hydrocarbon liquid surface liquid. And that information is one of the reasons people think that there could be life in those pools of hydrocarbons. I think it's on Titan. So moving on, I think this is interesting. I've got a physics background, so maybe that makes me nerdy enough to appreciate a lot of stuff other people might not. But there's really two things you need for liquid water, and it would help with a lot of other liquids, but especially liquid water. You need that you don't often find, and one is sufficient heat, and the other is sufficient pressure. So on Earth, you get that because the sun provides enough heat, and the gravity of the Earth and the atmosphere and the Earth pulling down on its own atmosphere provides the pressure, and so you can have liquid water, and you do have liquid water. But it's been relatively recently observed that you can, and in fact probably do in massive quantities, have liquid water elsewhere in the universe, but especially on moons right in the solar system. A prime example of that is Europa. If you look at that diagram, I have a picture of Jupiter and Europa. So Jupiter does not provide heat by way of sunlight to Europa, of course, but the tidal forces, the heat from the gravity of Jupiter and the variation in Europa's orbit around Jupiter provide tidal flexing, pulling, that creates heat, it's believed. And then the other thing is on Europa, there's a massive several-mile thick layer of ice, it's believed, on the surface. That can provide the pressure. It essentially encapsulates the liquid. There's heat, there's pressure, you can have water. If you can have liquid water, maybe there's life. Then the bottom diagram is a little bit more technical, but the idea there is that on Earth, if you look at the temperatures at the bottom, on Earth, the range of temperatures that Earth experiences, that's 1 atmosphere on the right. Water is liquid throughout most of the range of temperatures that you find on Earth. So then, but if you look at Mars, for example, right now has a very, very thin atmosphere, and the range of temperatures that you find on Mars mostly fall where ice is solid, or water is solid, not liquid. And that's one of the main reasons I think that life is very unlikely to exist on Mars, present-day Mars. You know, millions of years ago, maybe. Now, probably not. All right, so I'm going to move on. Let's see, it's 1:40. I don't know if I'm going to get through all these, but I'll start picking and choosing when I get close to 50 minutes, I guess. Unless somebody wants to hear anything in particular. Then I guess I'll skip to that. So let's see where I'm at, and I'll go to the next slide. I think I'm at 15. Hang in while I get to the next improperly sorted slide. All right, so then I talk about carbon, which I've talked about already, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but carbon is fascinating. It creates such a variety of molecules, and those molecules have all kinds of roles for life. So this article talks about that. This is a neat image. It's not copyrighted, and it's not mine, but it is neat. These are different allotropes of carbon. Carbon is so flexible that it can form all these beautiful and wild variations, molecules, just with other carbon. These are not molecules of organic compounds of carbon mixed with other chemicals, but carbon mixed with carbon, and still it can do all this, which I think is neat. So I'm going to go on. Another requirement for Earth-based life is these 6 elements. I won't go into detail, but these elements are abundant throughout the universe and the solar system. Buckyballs, yeah, I remember hearing about buckyballs. I don't remember too much, but I remember that they have organic compounds and seem to have potential ramifications for suggesting the existence of complex organic compounds beyond Earth that could potentially evidence life. I think that's right. Anyway, I'm sure it could be better said. Chomps, yeah, chnops, yeah, I've heard of that too. That's the acronym for the elements. All right, so I'm going to move on. And this is just pointing out the chemical elements. It's sort of interesting to see where they fall on the periodic table. They're all lighter elements, but I don't want to get too into it. So I'm going to move on. Let's see. So in the website and in these articles, there are lengthy multi-page discussions of what you might find boring, but I find really fascinating, which is in particular, let me see, organic chemistry for astrobiology, biochemistry, and cellular metabolism for astrobiology. So this just talks about organic compounds, which are carbon-containing compounds. I won't go into it. It's a little too much, but it is sort of interesting that it's a little too much to find what I was going to talk about the hydrocarbon, liquid hydrocarbon surface pools, but it's in here. So I'll go on. And I'm not going to go more into this, so I'll skip to the next thing. So basic biochemistry. Biochemistry is really interesting. It's the way that cells make more complex chemicals and utilize energy, liberate and utilize energy for cellular processes and for movement and all. But it's so interesting that every cell, every form of life on Earth uses basically the same system. Glucose. Glucose is eventually formed. Energy is stored using glucose from organic chemicals, and then that energy is liberated by being broken down chemically and used to support life. So this goes into detail, and I won't go into the detail. But I think this is interesting. This is honey. Honey is a glucose, basically, a sugar that's high in glucose. This compound, this one compound or molecule is oxidized for energy by almost all life on Earth, from bacteria to you and I. So that's interesting. I also mention here that what are called chemosynthetic microbes living around hydrothermal vents on the oceans of Earth use it as well. All right, so I'm going to go on. I hope this is interesting. It's hard to tell, but I'm doing my best. So cellular metabolism is an interesting concept. Thanks, Bruce. Is an interesting concept. Oh, good. So what I find from an astrobiological perspective, thanks a lot of compliments, I appreciate it, is really interesting about cellular metabolism is that it's crazy, but these microscopic cells using energy create massive scale changes on planetary or other bodies. So they can lead to observable major changes. Here's an example. No, that's not an example. That's even more information. This is an example. So this may not look like much, but this was taken from the International Space Station, and it shows the atmosphere of Earth. But isn't it intriguing to think that that atmosphere that you're looking at there from a great distance includes about 20% oxygen, which was almost certainly generated by the cellular metabolism of ancient microbes on Earth, which I find wild. So moving on, page 1. Let's see what's next on my list. So now I have a bit on the search, specifically the search for life on solar system moons. So this is, of course, not the moon of the Earth, which is devoid of liquid water and probably doesn't support life. But moons of other planets in the solar system may have life, especially in the subsurface oceans. Moving on. So this is an artist's rendition of a possible geyser on Europa. It's possible that even though most of the water in Europa is underneath miles of ice, there could be these volcanoes underwater that spew up liquid through the surface. And I think it's almost proven, or is proven, that there is these geysers. And it's not necessarily water. It could be gases and other things, but it could include water, I think. So it's really interesting. It's proven. There you go. The good things about moons is they're rocky, even if their planet is gaseous. Right, and that's a good point. I researched why people always talk about rocky moons. Like, I'm not looking for rocks, I'm looking for life, right? But, of course, rocks contain all sorts of minerals, all sorts of chemicals, and they provide an interaction interface for liquid water instead of necessarily an atmosphere. The water can interact essentially with the rocks, and you get minerals and the possible constituents that can be used by life. So that's a good point. And I think Europa falls into that category where it doesn't necessarily have the subsurface ocean is probably bounded on top and bottom by ice, but there could be elements, especially with these geysers, that have rocky characteristics, I think. I'm going to move on. This is sort of a cutaway of Europa, and it shows the subsurface ocean, which is the blue. I won't go into detail because I kind of already talked about it. I might eat up most of the hour on this. I hope that's okay, but if people want to interrupt me, just please do so. I think Titan is in some ways even more interesting than Europa. It's composed largely of rock and water ice, but it also has subsurface liquids that could be hydrocarbons. So this gets back to the question that was asked earlier. Titan is believed to have, I think Titan is the one with the surface hydrocarbons. I could be wrong about that, though. No, it does, right. There's evidence that it's likely to have surface lakes of hydrocarbons. And so what I wanted to mention at the bottom of this long text is an article that you can find on the web by an astrobiologist named Chris McKay, who I've never met. I just read the article. But it's fascinating, and it suggests that there could be evidence that there's methane-producing microbes that could live in the surface lakes of liquid hydrocarbons on Titan, moon of Saturn. Anyway, I'm going to move on. Let's see. So this is an image of the atmosphere of Titan. So the thing about Titan, too, is it has a pretty substantial atmosphere, as I recall, and the liquid surface hydrocarbon lakes could interact with that atmosphere. And that could increase the potential for life and also for finding life, as you would read in that article by Chris McKay. You can detect things in the atmosphere that might suggest that life has been eating, basically, and might be there. Patioplasma said, Chris McKay is great. I interviewed him once for an article on life on Mars. That's great. That's excellent. I wish I did. Okay. The next sign here. Enceladus is another really interesting, less talked about moon. It's a moon of Saturn. It has subsurface liquid water oceans, it's believed, and active cryovolcanoes, so ice volcanoes, which increase the interaction and the possibilities for life and for detecting elements from life. So I won't go into more detail on that. Let's see. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. Titan should be warmer than with methane-producing life than we'd expect without life. That's interesting. That's something that I would love to look into. I wonder if it's been looked into. It might increase the motivation to send more probes, to basically there. So Titan is definitely fascinating. So moving, I don't actually know enough about that to opine more, but I'm sure you're right, and it sounds very interesting. So let's see with this. This is a little too much detail to go into, so I guess I won't. But this talks about the cryovolcanoes, the underwater volcanoes that are believed to exist in Enceladus and can help create life, potentially support life, that is. I'm going to move a little quickly so I get through them all. So this is my introduction to the possibility of non-water solvents, chemical solvents for life. So as I say, many substances other than water could hypothetically serve as a solvent for life because they're liquid under conditions that exist in, for example, moons of the solar system. Methane is there, ammonia, and other hydrocarbons, and even some others. Right. So I'll move on. Let me find my next sign. Hang on just 1 second, please. All right, so, yeah, this I don't need to go into too much. This is more on the hydrocarbons as a solvent or a potential solvent for life. You know, it's getting late, so I think I'll skip to some of the final slides here that I think are really interesting. Actually, I'm almost there anyway. So if you look to the right on the list of topics, the last two are the search for intelligent life beyond the solar system and Radio SETI, and then the search for life on solar systems besides our own. I just want to spend a couple of minutes on that, and then I'm happy to take questions if there are questions, and I appreciate everybody listening. So search for intelligent life beyond the solar. One of the reasons there's not too many articles, it's harder to find detailed information, especially on radio telescope use. So I couldn't get too deeply into it just from what I could find, but what I found was fascinating. So I want to talk about it for a few minutes. Let's see, 1B. So I love this image. This is Jodie Foster from the movie Contact, 1997 movie Contact. This is the moment when she detects what she believes is a repeating pattern signal in a radio telescope array that is life, intelligent communications sent by another form of life elsewhere in the universe outside of the solar system. That would be wild. That would certainly be much cooler even than finding microbial life beyond Earth. Yeah, it was a good movie. It got a little weird toward the end, I thought, but the beginning really was great. So let's see. Moving on. I don't claim to be an expert in this area, but I put together some slides on Radio SETI. So the search for extraterrestrial life. Search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI. So this would be intelligent life because it's sending us messages. So radio telescopes can be used. Radio telescopes look at light in the long bandwidth radio spectrum. You can't see it, but it can be sent across probably tens, hundreds of light years. So searching the sky for potential signals that might be going through each of our bodies right now, but haven't been detected yet from intelligent life is a cool thing to do. Let me move on. This is a radio telescope array that's used in Radio SETI. 46. I'm just going to the next slide. Once I find it. Sorry, I'm taking a little while. So I find this fascinating. In Radio SETI, there is something called the water hole. This is how do I describe? A band frequency, a frequency band where people sort of listen for potential signals from potential communications from extraterrestrial intelligent life. It's sort of quiet. There's not a lot of interference there, and it's a natural, chemically significant frequency band. So you have to try to make a guess. Where would intelligent life broadcast? And that's one really interesting guess. Let's see. Every time we get better images of a new planet or moon, I'm reading now from the chat, we are surprised by the geology. I can imagine that when we find life, we will also be amazed. Yeah, I agree with that. Intelligent life will find us first, and they won't care about it. I don't know about that one. Maybe. Let's see what I got next here. So this is more detail on the cosmic water hole, so I won't go on more about that. I'm getting toward the end here, but I've got a little bit more. So I have a little bit on the search for life beyond the solar system on exoplanets and exomoons, so solar system planets and moons outside of the solar system. The images here are pretty neat, so I want to show them. This is the local region of our part of the galaxy. So the sun is in the center, and of course all the planets and moons orbiting the sun would be represented there. But as you can see, as you get out a number of light years, it's a 5 light year sort of increment there at the bottom. So as you get out 15, 20 light year radius from Earth, you capture a ton of solar systems, many of which have, or some of which at least, have planets. And who knows if intelligent life even might exist on those planets and be sending us transmissions through radio signals, even now, that we've yet to find, but might. So I'm going to move on. This is the sun's nearest stellar neighbor. This is another star just like the sun, but not. called Proxima Centauri. I just thought it was a pretty slide. I'm going to run through the rest of these in about a minute. I talk about the speculated habitability of planets and moons beyond the solar system. It's harder to find out because we're not as close that we can get information as easily. This is a really pretty artist rendition of a potential planet, exoplanet, which has 2 suns and could support life. Proxima evidently has the closest exoplanets. I see. I didn't actually realize that. That's interesting. Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of art. The circumstellar habitable zone is something I go into. It's the idea is that there's sort of a zone a certain distance away from each star that might best support life. So it can help you determine where to look. What exoplanet should I be focusing on to try to find life? And this is one indicator, potential indicator. And this is more meat on that. And this is the different types of stars that might support life. And that's almost about it. Let's see. So this is the tidal flexing forces are really interesting simply because moons of planets can have energy, can have heat due to the forces. They're being pulled less in front and more in back because the front of them are closer to the planet, etc. The physics is maybe detailed, but the bottom line is it produces heat on moons that otherwise would not have sufficient heat likely to support hypothetical life. Right, so that is about it for my website and display. Luke Skywalker watched 2 suns. He did. I didn't know that. That's interesting. So thank you very much. I hope it's been interesting for people. And I'd love to talk about people about this stuff who may have more background than me anytime. Have to leave, no problem. Happy to talk anytime. Thanks for the compliment on the name. Thank you for the applause. I greatly appreciate it. Patio Plasma, Adrian, Bruce, Ataraxia, CB, Day. An internal heat store has been critical to the endurance of life here. Baragon, that's interesting. I'd have to give that some more thought or research. I like it. So want to use your website? I would love to do more with my website. In fact, I would love to talk to people about this stuff and collaborate in any way that's practical. Thanks. Suggestion for you, and do not put too much text per slide. Right, I hear you. Yeah, the slides were really just copies from my website, but I hear you. Too much text per slide is generally no-no. At least there are a lot of images, right? Snowball Earth. Yeah, that's the website if anybody wants to go there. Sorry, just taking a second. My computer is a little stuck. 1 second. Let's see. Right. Thanks for that great topic compliment. That's it. So, one thing I do want to mention, after this, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to TP to my exhibit, which is from the Landmark. You're welcome, Tuya. Could you please put the previous slide once again, the one with the ranges? Oh, yeah, sure. Let me do that right now. I just have to find that. 1 second. Astro. Science. Let's see. I think that would be 55. Is that, if that's the slide, let me know. Oh yeah. So in about 1 minute, I'm going to TP over to my exhibit. And I can send anybody a landmark if you IM me. And also the LM on the right, you can see the blue LM. That's a landmark. Charlize, sure. Maybe I should go over there now. I guess I'm going to go over to the exhibit now. So I won't get your local chat IMs, but I will be at the exhibit. If you look over to the right, the landmark, I'm going to say see the LM landmark on the right for a TP to my exhibit. Going there now. I want to thank everybody again. I really appreciate your time. It's great. Thanks a lot.